Hey people, it is Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. Comic book thoughts time again. I'm actually really glad that I feel committed to doing this every week. It is a totally voluntary comic book diary, reading diary slash conversation with like-minded people. But getting to my weekly comic books in a timely manner, and it's very close again this week, but I kind of made this deadline for myself. I really enjoy reading comic books in individual issues and keeping up week by week. It really is fun for me. I read 12 comic books, and I would recommend 11 of them, depending, of course, on the individual's tastes. There's only one, though, that I wouldn't recommend, so I thought I was doing pretty well, and I was having a very good time. And there is something maybe about ranking them the way I do that adds an extra element of negativity, so sometimes I kind of regret that. But it's also kind of fun to think about the comics this way in terms of what I enjoyed most, what just hit me right. Again, watching other people's videos, excuse me, been thinking about how, stuff that one person thinks is awful, another person thinks is great. I heard some people on a chat talking about a certain artist who I think is a really cool, quirky artist, and they thought that it was the worst artist of the year. And I was thinking, other things made me think about story and how, like, I used to write a lot of fiction, how it's really the alchemy of making a story work or not work. People try to, pare it down to something scientific, but it really is an alchemy. And in comics, that alchemy includes the writer and the artist and the colorist and the letterer, and no doubt behind the scenes, the editor and perhaps the production staff at times. So, and then also the reader, where the reader is. And with one of the books, I thought, oh, this probably would have been my number one if maybe I read it before that book. Like, there's even that, like, what reading order I chose might occasionally, and in this week where things were really close, affect my minutia of ranking. But in a way, the ranking's unfair. And the way I used to do it, where I just would talk about each book, is probably much more fair. Anyway, but I'm going to continue for now with this unfair way of doing it. Two books that did not make the ranking included Copra number 40. They were both books I couldn't rank. Copra was fun, crazy artwork. As I kind of predicted, I couldn't really remember who all the different characters were. So it didn't have the right alchemy and impact. It was just an interesting experience. So I just didn't even think it was fair to put that in the ranking. And I may have skipped reading an issue too, which didn't help. And then sort of on a whim, I picked up this thing, Strange Attractors. I know nothing about it. It's from a publisher called It's Alive, I think. And I just kind of started reading it, and I just bounced off of it immediately. So I've only read 2 or 3 pages. I haven't given it a fair shake. Maybe I'll find time to get back to it. So in the official reading pile, starting with number 12, was Marjorie Finnegan, Temporal Criminal, by Garth Ennis and Goran Sudzuka. I should enjoy this comic much more than I did. I just didn't get a whole lot out of it. It lacks any oomph or effectiveness, and what kind of mild thrills issue 1 had were even missing from this book, from this issue, for me. In at number 11 is The Secret Land, and this had a lot to like about it, but I think I'm going to continue with it. I'm curious about it. It's a weird, quirky World War II comic, apparently about a couple who one goes to the German front and is a spy, the woman, and the man goes off to fight as some kind of special force in the Pacific Front against the Japanese. And he hears that the woman's dead, but in fact the woman's not dead. Hitler's been defeated, but there's still a secret kind of science fictional base of Nazis in Greenland that she's infiltrating. I think it was Greenland. And they have some kind of energy producing thing that may also be kind of Lovecraftian. So that's kind of interesting. I think it just was a little bit less satisfying than some of the other ones. I think the artist is not terribly involved. It's just kind of an illustrator for hire, you might say. I kind of like the colors. The writer is Christoph Emgard. The artist is Thomas Aria. I may be wrong. Maybe Thomas. I often look at the copyrights to see which of the creators gets copyrights, but I actually can't find either of them here now. No, it's copyright Christopher Emgard. Now, I did think of Earl Grey and his frustration that the only Germans ever represented in comics are evil Nazis, and we definitely get that here. They're quite evil and unsympathetic, except for maybe a telephone operator or two. But I'm kind of curious what's going on. I don't see how the husband or boyfriend on the Pacific Front is going to tie in with the story, and his part of the story seems less interesting. But I think it's a mistake for these comics not to include the artist as a full partner. You get a less exciting product. American Vampire then came in at number 10. It's issue 13, I believe. Book 9, I'm sorry. And I think it might be the penultimate issue. It was pretty exciting and pretty fun to read, but I continue to have the problem of not remembering all the characters and their connections and their emotional beats because I'm not properly invested in the whole world of American Vampire. But it looks like we're heading to quite a fun climax. One thing I was thinking, I mean, the colorist Dave McCaig, he has his style of coloring, but since the whole sort of point of this is it's the 1970s, it's 1976, it's the bicentennial in the United States, it's the birth of punk rock, which is perhaps a little bit ahead of its time. But anyway, there's a very punk rock character in here. Maybe he should have adjusted the colors a bit and not just thought horror comic. Let me find the punk rocker, darn it. Not just thought horror comic as he was coloring it, but also thought punk rock 1976 colors, sort of the 60s clashing with the upcoming world of disco and punk and all of that. Anyway, that's just a thought. I'll be right back. As for people who've been watching me for a while, see, I'm always commenting about colors, and I think that has a lot to do with the alchemy of a comic book and whether it works. And so in at number 9 was Oblivion Song, which sadly I don't know how I ended up getting the B cover. Maybe it's the Pride Month cover. Maybe more of those were printed, or maybe it says Pride Month on all the covers. I'm not sure. There was nothing in the interior story that connected to Pride Month as far as I can tell. It's just a nod to that. But this is a comic with brilliant color that is on the spot, so much of the time. The colorist being Annalisa Leone and Lorenzo De Felici. I assume they're both Italians from the names. Lorenzo De Felici is the artist and is listed as a co-creator right in the credits along with Kirkman, with Robert Kirkman. Really, I think the colorist is a creator too. Here's a brilliant example of using panels in kind of a cinematic way, but still kind of a way that especially works in comics, where we're seeing a scene and then we're seeing a reaction and then we're seeing the girl who is reacting to it in the scene. I thought that was a pretty incredible sequence. And there's lots of incredible sequences in here. This is reaching its climax. I was told it's the final arc, which is why I decided not to switch to trades after all. And I was certainly very happy I didn't hear. Even though I've ranked this at number 9, it's a comic I enjoyed a lot. The one thing that they never established the characters well enough for me in terms of their visuals, plus their personality and their relationships with each other. I think maybe if I go back and read it all together, I'll be able to track the characters better. So I'm at the point where I'm not even sure which brother is which. Maybe also because there's been a bit of a break, a couple of breaks in reading this. But there's 2 brothers, one has a beard, one doesn't. They've both been to the land they call Oblivion a couple times now. Anyway, other than that, though, it's really cool. It's the big battle, so that's kind of less nuanced and more sort of action. But within that, Kirkman's working pretty hard. Robert Kirkman's working pretty hard on keeping some characterization and some surprises going on the interpersonal level. So it's a good comic. In at number 8 was The Good Asian, and maybe my goodwill from the first issue is overflowing still onto this issue, so that I ranked it higher than, for instance, Oblivion Song, or it might have been that it should have been ranked at number 9 and not number 8. But anyway, there you go. I guess I'm also anticipating that I will continue to enjoy this. It's a mystery story set in San Francisco at a time when, in the 30s, when there were all kinds of limits on the Chinese, and Chinese immigration was not allowed. And so we have our hero, who is a cop from Hawaii, who's kind of been sent here on someone's behest. So my problem is there's too many details and too many clues and too much detecting. And maybe I'm not good at reading detective stories, but I'm losing kind of track. I get the general gist of where we're going and stuff, but not everything. And I don't know why the daughter of his rich patron is at this all-Asian nightclub. Does she own it? She doesn't seem to like him, our Asian hero. Anyway, and there's moments where I wasn't sure if we were seeing something really happen or kind of an illusion. So some little felt like little skips in the record in the song, although there's not a song. But still, it's a cool and unique comic and really well colored. I think the colorist holds it together a lot. That's Lee Lowridge, who is definitely in the upper echelons of colorists and maybe doesn't take the biggest. I don't know if he does Marvel and DC or really big name projects, but you see him here and there, and you always notice good coloring there. Okay, and then my number 7 in terms of my enjoyment, continuing to be much to my surprise, but thanks to Tom Taylor and very strong art by Andy Kubert, is Batman Detective number 3. Batman's now in Paris. It's fun seeing Batman in these different cities. We get a lot of background about Batman and Ducard, who I've encountered before, but I enjoyed the way he's portrayed here and the way his relationship with the young Bruce Wayne is portrayed. Very interesting. In some ways, I find Ducard in this version, a more sympathetic character than Bruce Wayne. So I thought that was really interesting. And it's really strong art and no doubt really strong coloring from Brad Anderson. I think it's Brad Anderson. He's kind of a mainstay for... Where do they have the credits? Probably at the very back. That should be a note. They should just stop. Just stop this credits on the last page thing. I am so tired of it. Brad Anderson with the colors. Oh, and Sandra Hope with the inks, the actual inker. The whole team does a great job. There are other comics where I find Brad Anderson's colors a little too dark or something, but somehow he works really well with Andy Kubert. And Tom Taylor seems to be the gem of DC Comics to the extent that I'm reading any DC Comics. So I should be looking for all his DC books and buying those. Which reminds me that I picked up some Nightwing, but I haven't read it yet. Geiger, which was really good, which shows you how good this stack of comics was for me, comes in at number 6. I think the only thing about it is it still feels... There's still just sort of the post-apocalyptic blues, in the sense that I've read so many post-apocalyptic comics and seen so many post-apocalyptic movies. There's a couple of There's at least one other post-apocalyptic comic in this stack, and I've been trying to kind of avoid them. But you can't beat this art, and it's a very solid story. People still refer to him as a superhero, to Geiger as a superhero. Maybe they know something I don't know. Maybe the story's going to take on a more superheroic tone rather than just this guy with powers who wants to be left alone and lives out in the radioactive wasteland. But now, obviously, we get kind of some shocking revelations about what we thought was going on with Geiger, so that was really cool. And on a more sort of predictable note, it looks like he's going to be taking some children under his wing. Where that'll lead, I don't know. I just got distracted. There's a sneak preview at the back. I never read sneak previews at the backs of these comics. Maybe glance at the art sometime. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to more of this. It's a high quality comic on high quality covers and paper, which definitely adds to my enjoyment, shallow as I am. And then in at number 5 was Carmen. And for Carmen, that has some of the best artwork of any monthly comic in the American market at the moment, which, of course, it's not an American comic, but it's currently a monthly comic in the American market. To rank a little lower than some of the other books is maybe partially because I'm taking it for granted now, or partially because I'm enjoying the relationship stuff and the kind of psychology of why she did what she did. But I also find it a little more kind of standard fare, a little predictable from sitcoms and other kinds of movies and the general pop psychology of what people are like. So it's just a little bit less surprising of a comic than it felt earlier, when it was more just focused on what it's like to be kind of post-death, I guess. It was half interesting and half kind of annoying to see sort of the behind-the-scenes bureaucracy that Carmen is part of. These women, I guess, or women-like creatures who bring people to their neck, guide people somehow to go through the light and head on to into their next lives. But that kind of remains to be seen how it plays out in the final issue of this book. I did have the thought, because I'm often talking about trades versus floppies. I did have the thought, but I'll have to see really when I read the final issue, that if I had read this all in one album, the way it came out in Europe, I might have liked it less, because I might have sped through it to the parts that I found a little more pedestrian in terms of the psychology, and spent less time with the art. Than by having it spaced out issue by issue, I kind of focused on, a 20, 25 page section at a time, let it simmer in my brain. So there's no denying the incredibleness of the art. But I'm sort of feeling like the final issue may have to slow down even more to focus on the psychology of the story. Okay, a book with apparently no psychology came in at number 4. It's Zigzag. I don't think it came out the same week as all these other comics because I believe I was shown it by Comic Crack. Subscribe to his channel if you haven't. A number of weeks ago, but it arrived in my shop this week, so I'm counting it. And it's from the FU Press, which is an imprint of Fantagraphics. It's oversized, and I hate to use the word art comic, but it's an art comic. And it's all silent, and it has a narrative in a sense that it goes from A to B to C to D. You move through the story, but then when you're done, you can't say what it was about or anything like that. It was a flow of surreal images, I guess. But what surreal images? They're wonderful. But it does sort of go to show for me that these kind of art comics, even, there probably are different silent comics, but a lot of silent comics are more for the art. The art stays in my mind, but if there's a story there, it doesn't stay in my mind. It doesn't stick at all. But this is well worth getting just for the amazing art experience. But these are the kind of things I think that are best as a one-shot comic. The artist should put his all into it and then move on, I guess. I can't imagine saying, I want 20 issues of this, even no matter how much I love the artwork. And that all goes to say that part of me feels like a quote, regular comic book with words and pictures working together in the synergy, the fusion, what was the word I was using at the beginning of this video? Anyway, that's one kind of comic, and a comic that is told silently over an extended period of time is something different. It's like trying to parse the difference between prose and poetry or something like that. Okay, in at number 3 was a comic where I picked up issue number 1 and issue number 2 at the same time because I heard good things about issue number 1, and the sci-fi angle to the story sounded really good to me, about a girl who wakes up and discovers she has been in a virtual reality. She's grown up in a virtual reality a la The Matrix in a sense, but something set up by her father to train her, and now she comes out to the real world, which is a world of post-apocalyptic disaster. The world is flooded, and there was a virus that turned most people into kind of creepy monsters. And her father and a few other scientists are in orbit above the planet because that's the only way to escape this virus. The virus, there's the Commandy moment, or at least that's how I think of it, as the Commandy moment there. So the girl and a robot teddy bear that her father's left behind for her have to go on this quest to get these plants, which I guess are going to fight the virus and improve the environment and stuff, and eventually save the Earth. So it's on the back of the daughter of the scientist to save Earth and mankind and all of that. And it's told really well. It's got really good art in a kind of unique style, unique coloring style even. Let's see. The artist is Joe Miguion. And the colorist is Brittany Peer. And the writer is Victor Laval. And I looked up Victor Laval, and he's a novelist who's written a bunch of literary / science fiction-ish kind of novels and is a professor at Columbia University. So I think I might look for some of his novels, especially if this continues to be good, because it's really well written. It is interesting to me in the there's a note at the back of each issue. In the note in the back of issue 1, he ends by saying, and make no mistake, if this world's going to get saved, it's the kids who are going to do it. And I think he's talking about our world, but it's up to all of us to save this world. We can't dump it on the kids. And in fact, us folks who are in our 50s and 60s and 40s, we have the economic power, and we need to start using it to make the environmental choices we need to make, and the few slight economic sacrifices we need to make. Okay, then this is the one that I might have put at my number one, but I put it at number two, Birthright. This is the final issue of 50 issues, one long 50-issue story. It's been great to read in individual issues. I feel like it's Joshua Williamson's masterpiece. And it's for fantasy readers. If you like the big, sprawling fantasy world, fantasy story, sword fights, magic, dragons, scary monsters of the fantasy sort, and a family drama and shifting relationships all in one, this is such a great thing. And by getting all the way to the end and it's still being really good, the whole thing seems even better than it ever has. I don't know. I think it took him about 7 years. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. I should have looked up when Birthright number 1 came out. But to read the whole thing is very satisfying. And I don't think any other sort of epic fantasy in comics has achieved this. So, really good. And as I heard Jared Osborne say, they rarely had good covers for some reason on this comic. It was one of the weaknesses, or the covers were a little off. But they do end with a really nice cover. So, yeah. If he ever wanted to, he could come back and follow the grandchildren or something, because other things will always go wrong. But super satisfying. I want to show you the last page, but I guess I can't. So, call it a number 1, because a much smaller book just hit me just right. And it's the first issue, and first issues often, are, if they're done well, are especially exciting. I really, really enjoyed the 6 sidekicks of Trigger Keaton. And I'd heard people describe the plot, and I thought, maybe I'll try it. And so it was just to pick up off the shelves because it happened to be there at my store. And I just love the way this story unfolds about this unlikable action star, a little bit, not that suddenly the names of action stars have fled my head. I've talked too long. Anyway, a little bit of a bunch of action stars, but probably a much nastier person than any real life ones, although I don't know for sure. But it unfolds wonderfully. It's a little bit like Assassination, which was also written by Kyle Starks, the writer here. Different artist. The artist here, Chris Schweizer, is not... When I glanced at it, I didn't think I would be too crazy about the art. It's so simple. But it's simple just right. As you read it, it's great storytelling. The characters are communicated really well. And I just... Page by page, I grew to like his art more and more and more. He colors it himself, and if I had one complaint with art like this, I kind of felt like, go ahead, make it a little more colorful. Be a little less autumnal in your palette, especially since it's supposed to take place in Hollywood and in California, and with these sort of characters that are who take themselves very seriously, but perhaps are not to be taken that seriously. But compared to Assassination, I feel like the characters are more full, more interesting, and play off each other. The comedy is a little less broad. It's still pretty broad comedy, but it's a little less broad than Assassination was. But there's more pathos to the characters, and more a feeling of like a whole lifetime or a half a lifetime of struggle or disappointment or what have you in the characters. But so this is going on my pull list. I'm super glad I found it. So yeah, it would have been enough. It would have, just to have this great finish to Birthright would have been enough to make me say, wow, comics are a great thing. I'm so glad I read so many comics. And then this was like the frosting on the cake, the 7 sidekicks. So, and I hear that the same team did one of those Mars Attacks comics. There were so many of them from, what was it, Dynamite, or was it IDW? So I have to look for that. I think I got a Popeye Mars Attacks. I don't think they did that one. But anyway, that Mars Attacks been going for a long while. I think they're done with those Mars Attacks books now, but I'm not sure. So thanks for sticking with me for another longer than I wanted to go, longer than I had hoped to go video. Those of you who stick to the end are the best, and I will talk to you again soon.